understand your land. And then the next one is this is before recognition, this where all the tribes lived. And Skidgewog, there were 5 villages that went from just below the Vermont border all the way up to Springfield. And this is the map they're using to identify who lives there now. So as I was saying, they're claiming it now, but it was not always that way. So when you're talking about that, you need to share that story that there's been change. And it's not appropriate to say you're on the homelands of the Abenaki, knowing Missisquoi, Nahegan, Coas, and Elnu all identify as Abenaki, because this whole quarter is Mohegan, and Mohegan is a federally recognized tribe. So you want to be aware of where you're actually standing or sitting or where you are when you write this land acknowledgement because it tells a different story depending on where you were. And that's about all I was going to share with you because I wanted to take some time for you to go outside. And but before I do that, did anybody have any questions about that? Any of that? I don't know, Leslie Ann, do you want to talk about how you've seen this in other places in the world? This way of looking at the land?
So thanks, Judy. Um, I think for me that was an excellent braiding because every time I hear you explain and talk and share, it just allows me to understand some of the things that I've learned, not just in other places, but also that I've learned in science. And it just makes it come together in ways that you're like, oh, that's why such and such. Oh, that's why. And so for me, it's just a really important moment to say thank you for your sharing because it again sets a lot of the flooding context, the drought context, the topography, the land into a different way of looking at things that as you like to say, it's a braided way, not a blended way. So I just wanted to say thank you for that.
You're welcome. Leslie Ann and I have done classes together and where we come from two different perspectives and braiding for me is a much stronger way to braid traditional knowledges and Western science and to braid it into a strong braid is so much better than blending because when you blend the sciences, you end up with um, usually Western science up on top of the blend. And so it's braiding, the use of the word braiding helps us to keep in mind that we're taking two very old sciences and weaving them together. We're braiding them together for a stronger um, result. Thanks, Leslie. And anybody else have any questions or comments?
Judy, I had a quick question, which is if folks wanted additional resources about the history of uh, people who have lived on these lands, you had that slide, which is very helpful. Are there other resources you would point people to learn?
Yeah, I guess the if you go to the Kennedy on sites, you'll see that there's the 94 statements. It helps you to understand what Indigenous people are longing for, how they're longing for their traditional knowledges to be shared. They're longing for people to develop a relationship with the land. So mindless um, things don't happen with the land, and you can see that clearly at the night with the 94 statements. You can see what they're looking for. And there's there's probably a few other sites out there that I would recommend, but most of them are like, yeah, just tell the story. They don't really know, so they're telling you what to do. And it's like, just tell an I story or a we story. And that is not, you got to remember, this is called a land acknowledgement because it's about the land. And that's hard for people to understand. I had written a land acknowledgement some time ago when I worked with you, and it got um, uh, converted and changed slightly to become the one with that was used in the annual report. And I'd like to read it to you if you don't mind. Not the one that ended up in the annual report, but the original one. Because what I'd like to do is when you go out for 15, 20 minutes, I want you to use all your senses. And the minute you open the door and walk outside, do you smell damp ground? Do you smell flowers? Do you see green? Do you see white? You know, do you hear the influx of birds? I want you to make a list of all these things you see and hear and smell and touch. And um, I don't think you can taste anything. Maybe you can. But and when we come back, we'll write them into the chat. And then at a later time, um, I think um, Elizabeth said she would help, but anybody who wants to help work with me, we can put all of your words together and make a land acknowledgement for the annual report. Um, I don't, we'll just find a time and we'll all work together. But for right now, please let me read an example of one for you, okay? Um, Again, this is sitting in my lawn chair. Hello, I'm so happy to gather here with you today. I know we all come from different corners of Vermont and we are digital, but I'd like to start with a land acknowledgement from where I sit, in the middle of the Winooski Valley watershed in Essex Town. Sitting at the foothills of Mount Mansfield, I see a new beginning coming to these beautiful, rich lands. They were created over 450 million years ago, the place where our mother has provided us with resources for food, medicine, religion, and material culture, and still provides for us today. We acknowledge the beautiful snow that shines brightly in the sunshine and shows us the 100 shades of white, blue, and gray, and the rabbit, turkey, deer, raccoon, and squirrel prints on her blanket. We hear the gentle wind rustling the maple leaves on the ground and rustling brown beech leaves hanging onto the trees. There are evergreens and trees who have lost their leaves and trees whose leaves are brown and still on the branch. We hear the wind whispering in the white pine boughs, weighted with snow. We hear the songs of the chickadees, juncos, and crows, and we see the blue jays and the squirrels foraging. The land has had 1,000 ages and will have 1,000 more. It has laid at the bottom of the sea and been pushed up into the towering peaks, has borne flood, fire, and glacier, and yet she still provides. We honor the Winooski people who have cared for this land since the last glacier receded and long before. We recognize the society that created across untold generations, and the physical and cultural genocides that have endured for 400 years. We acknowledge the humility and the gratitude, how they have endured with one heart and one mind, and the protection they have provided to this land in spite of the atrocities from which they themselves were not protected. The waterways and watersheds are essential to understanding the land and her people's survival. Caring for the watershed is caring for the people. We must remember with one mind and one heart. So we took that and we took all the words that people gave us from where they are sitting, and we made a land acknowledgement that went into the annual report. Um, what time? Do we have time for 20 minutes, David?
Yeah, We do, as long as, yeah, we have about a half hour left,
Okay, so
or even a little more if we want to.
if people want to get their coats on and take a piece of paper and a pencil and write down things that you immediately see using all your senses, and then come back maybe around one-ish.
Top of the hour. Yeah,
Yep. And then we'll type our words and our location into the chat.
that sounds really good. So folks, there's a huge temptation to like do your email or something. This is really a great opportunity. It's the most interesting thing you're going to do in your workday this whole week. Pop a coat on, or not even, and nature decided to make this a lovely day to do this exercise. Head on outside. We'll see you back here at 1 o'clock. We'll pause the recording here. Um, I might stick around for a little bit in case anybody has any questions, but head on outside and be observers.
Sounds like a plan. I'll see you at 1 o'clock.
See you at 1.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. All right, folks, it's about the top of the hour. So if you're there, welcome you to turn your cameras back on. Let us know you're here. Thanks, everyone.
David, this is Carrick. I'm going to be on the phone for about 16 minutes and then I'll be back on screen.
Okay, great. And when we do some of the exercise we're about to do in the chat, maybe you can just do that verbally.
Got it.
So I put in the chat already the things I saw and heard while I was out there. I thought I put Judy from Essex, but it didn't show up. So, but put where you're coming from. I'll do it again just to make sure you see the um
Yeah.
we need to know your location. There it is.
There it is. Now it came through. Yeah.
Great. So Johanna from Montpelier, and then put what you saw and heard, and we'll have a good collection, I think.
Yeah.
So I would like to, when we work on this to put it together, I would like to say that we're all sitting in these locations throughout the state and say where we're sitting. So we know that these thoughts and acknowledgments are coming from all the different places.
Yeah. So we can give folks a moment just to drop things in the chat.
So Lindsay, did you notice anything when you're driving towards Canada? It's kind of hard to write while you're driving, right? Ooh. Now,
Thanks,
now,
Lynn.
fantastic. Awesome. Oh, yeah. I see that they're starting to green up. I love that pale green in the spring. Oh, that's nice, Liz. Can now think about acknowledging and what our world would be like without these beautiful sights and sounds. Chickadees and crows and juncos, even a dog barking, right? We want to acknowledge them and honor them, these things on the land. A strip mall outside of Chicago. Yeah, feeling the spring sun. That's what I felt the minute I walked on my porch. Chris, I see where you talked about wandering the main street of Brattleboro. I did this activity on one of the Friday night celebrations they had, and we had people come up and write to us from all over the place, all different ages. And we had paper and pencils and crayons and markers, and they drew pictures of what they wanted to acknowledge. And then we put it together into a land acknowledgement. And I can't think of what the TV channel is down there, but they filmed it all and made a show out of it. It was phenomenal. The people were so, yes, BCTV. The people were so excited to do that on a Friday night to draw a picture or say a few words to share about what they were appreciative of. It was really beautiful. Oh,
Mm.
this is awesome. Yeah, this is great. Anything else? Anybody else? Oh, nice. Well, Elizabeth, I'm going to save this chat with all these words. And if you'd like to work with me to put these words together, that would be awesome.
Yeah, that sounds great. I'll take as well.
Okay. Nice.
I think, Judy, if other counselors want to volunteer to be part of that writing, certainly I think that could work too, right?
Of course, yes. Just let me know and then or let Elizabeth know and we can come up with a common time to meet because these are beautiful. I love it. Leslie Ann, you saw the clouds. Of course you saw the clouds.
Kelly, thanks for volunteering.
This is awesome.
I think,
Okay.
look, Judy, we could leave it for just a second more because I think people are actually writing. So I see stuff dropping in.
Okay.
We can just sit for a moment more, but we're not in a rush right now.
Richard, what town are you from? Can you add that to yours? Oh, awesome. Okay. And then, um, yeah, that's perfect. Oh, wow. We're pretty much all over the state. Anybody from the Mohegan side of the state? Rutland, Bennington?
We used to have, I don't think we have someone on the council right now. Okay, does anybody need a little more time to write? Okay. Well, Judy, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
It's a gift to
Yeah.
have this sort of moment to pause um, and do this kind of reflection. The follow-up, as Judy mentioned, is Liz Amler. Um, Liz Amler could organize a moment to look through all these comments in the chat, work with Judy and Kelly and anybody else who wants to be part of it, um, and turn this into an acknowledgement that's right for April 14th, right? 2025. And I think specific to these different locations, so can speak specifically to history in the land in those locations, which also means specifically to the people in those locations.
Mhm. Awesome.
Okay, Great. Well, thanks so much. We're actually a tiny bit ahead of schedule, which is unusual. I think what we might do is why don't we just take a bigger break since it is kind of lunchtime anyway, and we can meet at the bottom of the hour. Because our schedule was to start back up at 1:30. So why don't we take a slightly longer break? Folks can grab a bite to eat if you haven't already. And we'll see you back here at 1:30. Sound good? If you're still writing, don't hesitate. Just keep writing and drop it in the chat. And thanks everyone for leaning into that exercise. We'll see you back here in just a bit. Thanks again, Judy.
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, folks. Welcome back. Hey, Joe. How's it going?
Going all right.
It's good to see you.
It's you.
Hey, Kelly. All right, I'll give folks a second to get their cameras back on so I know you're here. Hey, Julie. Hey, Carrick, Liz, Chris, Joey. Good to see you all. Okay. I will pull up our agenda again just to show everyone what we're doing here. Okay, so what we have left here is we want to talk about the text of the chapters and how we're going to be handling that over the next period of time, in addition to refining the priority actions themselves and the overall table of actions. So we're going to talk about that for 20 minutes. Then we're going to talk about looking ahead to May and June meetings. We'll take public comment at 2:15. And then we can talk about tonight's meetings and a reflection of what happened at the virtual meeting last week. Okay, so we have a deck here as part of the materials, and Jane and Liz Amler put this deck together. And I'm curious, Liz, would you like me to go through this, or would you like to walk through this?
Either works.
Okay, I'll just do it for now. And Liz, help me out when I run into trouble, okay?
Okay.
And if folks can see that okay, I'll just keep sharing my screen like this. Okay, so there's good news and still challenges ahead. The good news is that draft versions of all the chapters have basically come in, and that's a lot of writing. And so thanks everyone who invested time to do that writing. There are challenges in what's come in. Generally, we have too many words. And part of that is, I think the word count that was suggested was a little bit generous. And part of it is just there's a lot of words. And so if we think about a cohesive document that'll be this updated climate action plan, overall, getting to a slightly tighter text is going to be one of the next moves. Secondly, there's plenty of overlap, and this is part of farming out the different chapters to different authors, and also just looking at the outline, having read the chapters, there's opportunities to make sure we're not duplicating content. Of course, there's different voices, and there's an opportunity to have a more consistent voice, and that through line of how does this feel like a cohesive thing. We have time to work on this. And so what we wanted to talk about as a full council right now, we started talking about this with the steering committee earlier, is what to do. And what's the pathway that makes sense from you all from a counselor standpoint, and then the support that the Climate Action Office can provide. All right, so here we go. There's two big buckets of chapters. One we're calling contextual or introductory, and the other are the recommendations piece that sort of are the context to explain and give meaning to the priority actions and other actions. So let's split those two things in half for a second. On the contextual chapters or the introductory chapters, I think it makes in the Climate Action Office, Liz Amler, Jane, and everyone else is happy to work with the authors of those contextual chapters and get it to the right length and the right tone and the right, sort of stitching together of those chapters into a cohesive piece. And so if you were a counselor is okay with this, the Climate Action Office can work with those individual authors, right? Again, this is the like Leslie Ann's piece and some other pieces that are the introduction to the Climate Action Plan and provide this important context. Now, for the recommendations chapters, what Liz Amler and I and Jane have done is done a slightly more detailed set of instructions here about what we're looking for in each of those chapters, which are these bullets here. So this is some better, I would say, enhanced guidance from before. And you can see here what we're looking for in these chapters that introduce the actions. And some of the chapters do this. None of them really nail it just yet. Okay, so there's sort of molding the raw material that we have into this more structured outline, right? Where you start with why are we talking about this focal areas? Why is it important for climate action in Vermont? What's some essential background that can explain why we're focusing on the priority actions? Like what's the data? What are some milestones in the progress to date? We also put a line in here that not everybody had, which was, what did you all as a council hear over the last period of time from public engagement? Now, this is stuff that we did in the fall, but also what we're about to do right now. So you can update this with even more recent comment from this month's engagements. And then the priority actions, we're looking for a narrative description, excuse me, of those actions. We are not looking for repeating line for line those actions or putting them in a table or anything. But yes, a narrative of saying, these are the things that are being focused on, you know, in a sort of paragraph form. And also a nod to other actions that aren't priority actions, but are in the table of full actions to say other things that are also important and are listed below in the table are blah, blah, and blah, blah. So you can put some of those. And then this third bullet here is, can you say in a sentence or two, again, we don't need to list out bullet points, but in a sentence or two, you know, this area builds on the work of that other area over there in this way, or is complementary to the stuff that's happening over in this other chapter. So that's what we're looking for in terms of a sort of structure, a common structure to those with a little bit more detail than was provided earlier. So how to get there? So we wanted to confirm with all of you that this table of contents, what I just walked through, the bullets above, seems like the right approach. Let's confirm that that's right. There's a couple of things I'll click into it in 1 second. When we look at the outline, there's ways to streamline. Now that we see what happens when we don't streamline, there's 3 different chapters on ag and ecosystem stuffs that honestly can be combined into one. Right, so we can take what Jael did, what David Mears did, and what Ryan was in the process of doing, and do a common chapter that works at all of those, right? For instance, and I think, Jael, we can work together, right, and weave in essentially the 3 components of the subcommittee's work, right, which were the reduce and sequester, the adapt and support, right, and then the land use stuff, or the why am I forgetting what it's called, the third bucket, but it's essentially natural land stuff. So we can combine those. Similarly, across the mitigation stuff, the mitigation chapters, we can do a stronger tie. There's essentially 5 chapters right now that do different whacks at sort of the overall mitigation strategy. And so those 5 chapters need to talk with each other and not just repeat each other. So that needs a through line across the sort of big emissions reductions chapters. So that's what we're suggesting here. In terms of a process, you know, counselors can work to revise the chapters based on this guidance. There's going to have to be some little groups set up on the ag and ecosystem piece, on the sort of 5 different chapters that take different whacks at the mitigation piece. And probably those groups should at some point delegate a lead to give a more consistent voice, particularly on the mitigation ones where you will keep separate chapters. You just want them to talk nicely with each other. There is an interest in working, making sure that co-chairs from some committees and even subcommittees themselves, should you think that's necessary, could look at this content. There's some sensitivity there in that this isn't, you all as a council, you're in the moment now of digesting, making decisions, and getting this updated plan out the door. And we're not sort of going back to subcommittees and like asking for subcommittee approval, but there could be important historical knowledge and other things that subcommittees may want to add to this. So it's delicate, and there's opportunities to circle back with folks who've been part of this from the beginning. And then we may need to empower the steering committee, just out of practicality, to work on vetting things and getting some edits ready for the council, just to get the process going well. Ideally, we want to be approving all this content by July 2nd. Okay, let me stop talking. But that's the view here. And I guess let me start by saying first, Liz Amler, did I mess anything up?
No, sorry, I couldn't find the audio button. No, you don't.
Okay. Okay, great. So counselors, first off, big picture wise, how does this sound overall, big picture? The fact that today what we want to do is make sure that this is the right set of, this is the right outline for these recommendations chapters, that you're okay with Climate Action Office working with the authors of the contextual or introductory chapters. Let's just start with some general feedback from counselors about this. Liz?
Yeah, overall makes sense. And I'm sure individual areas will require, different engagement either at the subcommittee level or in task groups. Just a clarifying question, and it may be linked in the public meetings that we're going to talk about later, but where are the fully revised, up-to-date priority actions? I know there were some issues, including in the electricity one. So I just wanted to know that before embarking on the next stage of this writing. Thanks.
Yeah, you bet. I'll drop that link in the chat, or maybe Jane, if Liz is there, she can drop. It's posted online, and I'm glad you mentioned that, Liz, because there was some final back and forth to fix some issues there. Great. Other quick reactions. Thanks, Liz. Other quick reactions, Chris, to how to do this.
Yeah, I mean, so I spent a lot of time drafting a chapter, never got any feedback on it yet to date. No idea what anybody's opinion is about it. So I still feel like we're talking in hypotheticals because I have no idea what my baseline is at this point. Like, how close did I come to the direction that I got, and how far am I? I'm still not sure that what you're proposing is going to get us anywhere different, because you still have multiple authors writing the same thing. So in my experience, I mean, we could even take the approach that saying, hey, we had different authors for different chapters of this thing and pull it together almost more as a plan that's also a compendium, as opposed to more of a traditional plan, if we're going to continue to follow this path of having multiple authors, because otherwise this could take a shit ton of time and not necessarily get us anyplace different. I've never seen a plan written this way. It doesn't mean it can't be, but just kind of a interesting, creative way to produce a plan like this.
Thanks, Chris. Are others having a similar reaction? Thoughts about how to strike the balance here of empowering you all as a council to really have an important part of writing this, while at the same time making sure this is efficiently done? Jared, would you try to jump in there? Or Rich, either way.
I'm happy to defer to Rich.
I don't think we're in a good position to just turn this over to a single author. So but I think there's a decent chance that we will achieve a reasonable amount of consistency across the chapters. And I see, I'm taking on board the mission for the mitigation subcommittee that we need to coordinate our drafting, and I'm happy to do that with the authors of the other sections of the mitigation subcommittee text in order to eliminate the duplications and, as you say, to add a through line that kind of ties it together.
Thanks, Rich. Thanks, appreciate that. Jared?
Yeah, I just wanted to say I generally agree with the process as proposed. I also want to say I hear what Chris is saying, and I think part of this is the balancing of the timing of different pieces, because, as I think about it, what we've primarily looked at that has gotten the kind of eyes and attention of the full council have been the draft priority recommendations. That's what we've really been focused on discussing, so that those felt ready, even if not full agreement or consensus on them, but they felt ready to go out as drafts for the public engagement sessions. And now there's a lot of focus on these meetings across the state. And I don't think many of us have had the ability yet to review the draft chapters of the plan. And I'm thinking back to the process the first time, and I remember it for better or worse, it didn't happen towards the end. But we did have a time for every counselor to read the full draft of the plan and to come with our questions, suggested edits, and then we worked through those kind of step by step in trying to come to consensus or ending up voting on the whole first components of the plan and then the full plan. And so my sense is that, and I feel the same way. I don't think I got any feedback on the draft chapter that I submitted. I imagine a number of people who worked on introductory or contextual chapters may be in a similar boat. But I wonder if it works kind of timeline and process wise to say, let's, as counselors, now that, I guess the question is, when do we review as a council the full draft? Do we wait until there's been an effort to, for instance, try to condense the ag and ecosystems chapters into one cohesive whole to better have a consistency across the mitigation chapters through the effort that Rich just offered to lead, and then do that? And that seems to me the right approach, rather than reviewing what we have now that may be changing from those lead authors. But I also hear Chris that it'd be better to get some feedback sooner rather than later, for those authors who've drafted something but haven't heard any of that yet. But I just wonder if it makes more sense for that to be more of a focus in May, perhaps once there are some updates to these drafts and once the public engagement sessions have finished, rather than doing that right now.
Yeah. Thanks, Jared. Yeah, when I hear this, it sounds like to ask a counselor to go back and reorder or reorganize the chapter based on this new outline. You would need some feedback before that happens. And so I feel like, Chris, hearing you, it's like, it's not fair to ask you to go do that without a little bit of feedback or somebody going, giving you some thoughts there. And that somebody could be the Climate Action Office, or could be, I don't know, me or somebody, right? And that seems like a totally fair request.
And I'll just say, I'm sharing this from the perspective of somebody who does planning for a living and does plans for a living. And if I gave staff this kind of instruction, they would be bound to fail, because they wouldn't know what on earth they're responding to. And
Yeah.
so we need to set ourselves up to succeed in as efficient a manner as possible. So that's part of my concern, because I keep hearing about the problems, but I still have yet to know what the problem with what I drafted, or what Jared drafted, or anybody else drafted. I don't know. I just keep hearing kind of rumors of the problems, and we're talking about that now. And I'm not beholden to what I wrote. I just keep hearing it's too long, which frankly is not the basis for. Things can be long. Is it that they're not communicating effectively or efficiently, Or are we really being driven by a word count because it doesn't fit within some, overarching word count that the council established a long time ago? So, I mean, to me, it's just, I just don't have a whole lot of substantive context yet to know where we're headed relative to where we are now. So I'm hearing about process, but not necessarily what the fundamental problems are.
Got it. Okay.
And others can disagree with me. That's just my perspective.
Yeah. Jael?
Yeah, so my understanding was that we needed to write a narrative or a story based on the priority actions, but those priority actions, like the language isn't finalized. So for me, it felt like it feels like a waste of time that I did all that writing on something that the language is going to change. So like the meaning of it might change in those priorities. And then if we're taking public comment to on these priority actions, I feel like we should take the public comment, we should get the wording for all these priority actions finalized, and then we start the drafting process. It just feels like we kind of went backwards. And yeah, and I also found the guidance a little vague and wasn't quite sure what I was supposed to be doing. I just, basically taking what was in the old plan and trying to reword it a little bit.
Yeah. Thanks, Jael. So I would say in the face of this, concretely a few ideas. First, it sounds like Rich is willing to help lead a group of folks that can look across the different mitigation chapters, and I can show those on the screen right now, and do a process of working to make a more cohesive set of like a storyline that goes through the document. In addition to the individual chapters getting reworked a little bit more, that more precise guidance that I just shared on the screen. Jael, I think you and David Mears, with help from Billy or others, and Ryan, could do a quick process of combining those three pieces. I'll show you, to make a single ag and eco chapter, right? That goes into the three areas with the three task groups of that. And that might make it a little easier and less repetitive for you all, right? And then for everybody else, it sounds like if we're asking you to do another whack at your chapter, you need some feedback, specific feedback, to make that worthwhile. Jael, to your point of the timing of this, like, wow, we don't have the actions finalized. We're doing all this public input right now this month. That is true. And it's not crazy to get going on the basics of why we've been focusing on the areas we're focusing on, right? And that's what the introductory part of these chapters are, like why this area is important for climate action. Why are we focusing on these areas? What's some data and some other things that supports this? And then the narrative around the action, maybe we're going to tweak it a little bit, or the sentences around what we've been hearing from the public, that might get changed a little bit depending on what happens this month. But the rest of that feels like you're in pretty solid territory even now, even though it is frustrating. I hear what you're saying, Jael, because you're not quite sure how the priority actions are going to come out just yet. Okay. I'm just going to share my screen real quickly with the chapter list to show a couple things that will help make this a little bit more real. And then I want to go back and just make sure folks are comfortable with the update of the guidance. So these are all these contextual chapters, and this is something where the Climate Action Office is happy to work with all of the authors who spent time on this, to get those going. I know, Kelly, you would like to have the full council look at the what's coming out of the just transitions piece and the equity piece here. So we should make some time, Kelly, to let that happen. And then when we get down, and this is again, this is all sort of context. And then when we get down here, where it starts being top priority actions, this is more the sort of recommendations chapters, the chapters with built around the content of the actions. And when I said there's 5 that are related to emissions reductions, this one partially is related to emissions reductions. Is not only that, but is partially related to emissions reductions and sort of the big narrative of why this plan focuses on these issues, right? Then we're going to have a mitigation pathways overview, right, that Rich has been writing, right, which should build off the same sort of narrative from the top here. Then we're going to have transportation, buildings, electricity, which again should build off in these things, and it should be this common through line through these 5. The agriculture we can pull together into a separate ag and ecosystems chapter that gets at reduction of emissions and sequestration. So this may get mixed into the other ones. But these 3, plus this, plus top priority actions, Rich, are the ones that I think would really benefit from some common language. Carrick?
Quick question, please. As a context setter, are we ever going to talk about like resources, what we think of that, the context? I remember, to give credit where credit's due, I think it was Chris Campany a few times. I'm sorry, Chris, don't want to invoke you where I shouldn't, but talking about, look, there's serious challenges to this, and a couple of initiatives that were in service of accomplishing some of the exact same things we were talking were pretty ran into challenges, both in terms of structure and financing. And I'd like to think, David, and I hope the other councilors, I've been sounding this need for price tags for individual initiatives, knowing what I know about what's coming for electricity ratepayers anyway, as one subset of the populace necessary to fund this. So just in terms of setting the context, I just wonder about that opportunity and that obligation. Thank you.
Thanks, Carrick. Julie, did you want to talk about that?
No, I was more going to flag the top priority actions chapter doesn't exist yet, and Jared and I are waiting to draft that until we get to a little bit more clarity about exactly what's going to be in our priority recommendations. So I know you'd lump that into things that could be being worked right now, but I would take that off the list.
Great. So that actually can flow that direction. If you get this, you start to get language together for these 4, and then you can build up a narrative at the top. Okay.
That's right as well. Agreed.
Yeah, and it should include the ag and eco work as well as the resilience work. It's not just mitigation.
Absolutely. Yeah, this is the whole enchilada.
Right.
Okay. Yeah, to Carrick's question, I think this is something that, you all have spoken about before. It is very challenging for you as a council to get very precise on funding needs for any specific program. Like, that's a big ask. And yet there's an appetite that you have expressed to understand the implications of what you are proposing. So I am curious, when we look out, and I'll share this in just a moment, when we look out at the meetings to come and the time you have as a council to meet your deadline, what kind of conversation is going to be the most helpful, knowing that a sort of detailed, item like action by action price tag, as Carrick, as you're hoping for, seems a little out of reach for this body.
Well, just a quick in my comments, what I was saying is I've kind of given up on the item by item price tag, but I think that there needs to be look, honestly, I don't want to put my name on something where it said, are you kidding me? You didn't even think about the cost impact to ratepayers, for instance. I mean, I have that obligation. So what I'm saying is, as an overall contextual point, at least acknowledging that we didn't have time to put a price tag to each. I'm not saying that there has to be one and that we would have any chance of nailing that down before. No, it is. I think there needs to be acknowledged. I mean, candidly, what I view as one of the tragic flaws of it is that we don't have that that type of information. But I've long since conceded on the overall per initiative price tag.
Got it. Sorry to misrepresent what
Sorry.
you're saying, Carrie.
That's all right.
Yeah. I really think that's important for you all to be able to articulate what you are able to say as a council now about the analysis you've done or the analysis you've not been able to do because of the nature of the constraint placed on you in your role and the timing of this. So when we look at the meetings going forward, I would welcome folks' thoughts about how to put in those meetings, having that kind of conversation and how it shows up in this document. Jared?
I think one of the things that helped us last time is that we had developed a set of pathways that could meet the obligations of the GWSA in terms of, at least in terms of emissions reduction. And there was associated economic analysis with that looked at, we had, for instance, a marginal abatement cost curve. We had analysis of projected not just cost, but savings, and not just upfront costs, but long-term savings, applying our social cost of greenhouse gases as well to the benefit cost analysis. And I think that, unfortunately, we're at a place now where we're behind schedule on the update to the business as usual work on having pathways. I don't even think that associated economic analysis with the pathways is planned for this set of work the way that it was for the first plan, unfortunately. And so my sense is that the best we can do is to follow the obligation as set forth in the Solutions Act, which is to put forward the recommendations for how to cost effectively and equitably meet the responsibilities set forth in the law, and that the specific budgeting questions to me end up being addressed and hashed out by the legislature and the administration. But I think it is too, we don't have the information, and I think it would go beyond our charge or responsibility to be trying to identify budget numbers with this plan.
Thanks, Jared. Chris?
And another thing that I'm just concerned about is the greenhouse the mitigation opportunities and costs kind of in a vacuum relative to opportunities and costs related to climate adaptation and resilience. Because I'm sitting here supposed to be representing municipal government. FEMA just canceled the Building Resilient Infrastructure and Communities program, which established baseline funding for action. There's some question about what's going to be happening going into the future with regard to, public assistance, individual assistance, the formula funding for, mitigation that would come along in the wake of a disaster. There's also some serious question about ongoing funding of state and local emergency preparedness. So from my perspective, when it comes to adaptation resilience, it kind of feels like, a lot of avenues that we had previously pursued are going away. The state funding for the flood resilient communities, they're not able to renew that. And so, it kind of feels like, I've used this analogy before, almost like we're an island state. So if you have a certain pot of money that you can use, if you look at your overall contribution to greenhouse gases and you look at your immediate needs to get people into safe places, including housing and growing communities up and away from hazards, where do you put your money? And we have some very existential questions for, as we've learned from communities that have had repetitive flooding over the last few years. So it's hard for me to look at this in a vacuum. But yet as a council, we've not discussed this really at all unless I've just missed it. So I know what the act says, but I also know what the reality on the ground is. And I don't want us to come across as tone deaf, because I think that'll do the GWSA and the council and the climate action plan more harm than good if we come across as being detached from the reality on the ground and, thousands of traumatized Vermonters and loss of housing units. I sit on the Hazard Mitigation Grant Project Review Committee, and I think we're up to about $70 million now in buyouts. So there's some real world stuff here, and I just worry that we may come across as being out of touch if we just kind of plow ahead with just what the act says.
Thanks, Chris. Secretary Clark?
Yeah, really just building off of what everyone has said as part of this discussion. The reality that we're facing as a state from a funding perspective continues to be complex, and not wanting to put forward a plan without some sort of, maybe it's a caveat or something about funding and the resources needed to complete portions of the plan, maybe as something for us to consider. But it'll be hard as the person that puts together the governor's budget, and then as we move this plan forward, to not address the impact, understanding the limits of our charge.
So I really appreciate us getting into this conversation. And what it tells me is that we do need to schedule time to talk as a council about this and to come up with some language that helps describe how we're thinking about financing and funding and how it relates to the way we've put together priority actions in this plan. So that's what I'm taking away from this conversation. And let's do that. Let's schedule up some time in one of these meetings, and I'll show the meeting schedule in just a sec. Before I show the meeting schedule, I just want to circle back. Is there anything else folks want to say about the instructions, sort of the updated instructions for the writers, the plan for consolidating the ag and eco stuff, and having a common through line on the mitigation stuff? Any final thoughts or questions on that in the chapter writing? As next steps, I think, Rich, let's talk about how, Liz Amler and I talk about how we can do something efficient with those mitigation chapters. Jael, let's you, David Mears, and I talk about consolidating up the ag and ecosystem stuff.
I think Ryan should be there too.
And Ryan, yes, thank you. Okay, great. Rich?
Yeah, I just also wanted to add that, like Chris and Jared, I haven't received feedback other than having a really productive conversation with Secretary Moore about the text, and want to just let counselors know I'm happy to receive your suggestions as we go about this, process of trying to stitch the mitigation sections together a bit more.
Yeah.
So just feel free. And David, I'll talk to you and Liz about, mechanics of how to do it.
That sounds great. And I will say it's a tricky thing. Jared brought this up as well. It's like, do you invest your time reading all these chapters now, or do you wait, hold your fire to read? So I think the key is, if we're asking folks to do things, I say we, like Jane, Liz, me, and others, we should be providing some nuanced and detailed feedback. So that's what I'm hearing as well. And counselors, you are welcome to jump in. All these things are posted up publicly. You're welcome to jump in and provide input. And we know we're going to ask you to read it in very close detail later in a new version. Okay. So let's just take a few minutes before we take public comment, and that is to look at our agenda of meetings coming up. And there's a slide linked online. I'll share it on my screen now. And it's part of our last conversation too. And Liz, help me out to keep me out of trouble on this, please. We are aiming to do an extremely tight turnaround on some summaries coming out of the public engagement work that goes right up until the Thursday before your May 5th meeting. And we really want to spend some time, though, at the May 5th meeting, interacting with those summaries, talking about your own experiences when you were physically present or listening in the virtual sessions, and spend quite a bit of time on May 5th thinking about what you're hearing and what that means for the work. Also, Jane expects to be able to do have a business as usual update presentation from the consultants on May 5th. And we need to finish that meeting thinking about, okay, what needs to happen? What needs editing? What needs updating? Where's the work? That work will happen in between meetings. May 19th, we'll be really diving into content, trying to solve problems, addressing issues, with a goal on our June 2nd meeting that we will be moving to finalize chapter language. And if we didn't finalize content on May 19th, finalizing it on June 2nd. So we're really trying to use the month of May to get the bulk of the sort of core content deeply discussed and approved. By June 9th, there's some additional things that will go into this, the executive summary, a letter from the council, some other things like that, that will be written once we get the core content agreed. There's this comment, there's a bullet here, edit standing recommendations due to modeling. Again, to Jared's point, modeling is barely going to show up in time for this work, at least for your July 1st deadline. However, there will be some modeling outputs that could be helpful, and we'll be open to adjustments based on that. There's a proposed new meeting on June 23rd to formally adopt the plan, and also any legislative updates that would impact how you want to adopt the plan, or what your vision is moving forward. So that's what we're planning on doing. Very busy few months. And I just want to check in with folks to get, excuse me, get your reactions to this. Any feedback on this? Any questions or doubts on this?
I think some other questions like where we want to fit in that just transitions review piece too. I don't want that to get lost in the mix.
Can you say that one more time, a little louder?
Just transitions chapter.
Oh, JT, yeah, just
Yeah. So let's want to fit that in somewhere in here.
right. So there's two things I don't see on this that we talked about today. One is that, and the other is when to talk about the funding issue in the kind of language you want to have in the plan about it. So it seems like those are two missing pieces that need to get slotted into these meetings. Anything else, folks? Are we up for it? Do we have it in us?
I just want to add that, again, on the funding question, I hope, again, it's not just going to be about the mitigation actions. I hope we're also going to be talking about frankly, the tension between the mitigation actions and the adaptation and resilience actions.
Yes, absolutely. I can't imagine that conversation without that, Chris. I think that's crucial. Okay. All right. Well, I'm not seeing other reactions to this.
David, I guess I'll just throw out too. I mean, we may just have to hunker down for a couple of days and get stuff done.
Yeah.
And I say that as somebody, I mean, we all have limited time, and I know there's a lot of, administration members who, are very time limited as well, but I don't know. Otherwise, we may not be able to just knock this out in a few 3-hour meetings. Maybe we can, I don't know, but.
Right. That's in the cards, right? Should we meet for a day, right? Should we invest, some significant time, particularly when we're trying to finalize key points, key pieces of content? Okay.
Well, Dave, before you say, okay, if you don't mind, I mean, just what are people's thinking on this? Because
Yeah.
we've had a most of day meeting. I don't know how much progress we made on that one. I mean, what are people thinking? I mean, are we, you know, I mean, I saw some nods and all, but what are people thinking?
Secretary Moore?
Yeah, I mean, I think some of it depends on the ability of counselors to commit to reviewing draft work plans and providing feedback back to chapter authors. Chris, your point's well taken. And, you know, I both struggle with and sometimes appreciate having essentially working meetings, right? Whether it's you show up at a meeting and are provided with reading time, or you show up at a meeting and are asked to mark up a chapter or ask questions. It creates space on everyone's busy calendars to do that. But to the extent folks can commit to doing that independently, and maybe, you know, giving ourselves some deadlines for undertaking that kind of review, could help move the process forward. Because I agree. I think there's the moment is close, if not already upon us, where counselors are going to have to roll up their sleeves and provide that kind of input and feedback in terms of what we want to assign our names to.
Yeah. Okay. Well, what I'm hearing is an openness to some more time, and maybe it's time where we just sit together and read or provide feedback and things like that.
And David, I just put in the chat, I just don't want it to get lost, that, I mean, ideally, I mean, I would love to get feedback on the chapters. Ideally, that would be aggregated. So that I'm not now have, so that now the chapter authors aren't having to like carve out time for 10 separate conversations. It'd be better to have, you know, some kind of aggregated comments.
Okay. Great. And I think if we don't have a shared platform, whether it's the state SharePoint or a Google Doc, which we're not supposed to do, right, from a public meeting standpoint, is working together on a document. So we have to do it individually. But we can try to find a way, Chris, to minimize the chaos of that. Yeah. Okay. We're a couple minutes over when I said we would break for public comment. So let's go ahead and break for public comment, and then circle back to our last conversation. So if you've been listening into our meeting today and have something you'd like to add, go ahead and raise your hand, just like the way Annette did. And we've been trying to keep comment. I put a fair amount of time on the agenda, but for individual comments, we try to keep them relatively brief. Annette, you're up. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, I'd like to comment on the virtual meeting I attended, but I'd really prefer to hear the council's discussion about it first. Could I move this? Could you move this until after you've talked about it?
Yes, let me just see. Are there other people here who would like to make a comment? Then sure. I think that's
Thank
fine.
you.
We can do a little quick round of public comment when we're done with the next conversation.
Thank you.
Might even end early. Okay. I'm just double checking no one else who's been joining our meeting today would like to make a comment. Okay. Great. Okay. So let me just circle back that very last conversation we had before I jump into the public comment stuff. Any other feedback before we update those meetings? Maybe add some more hours to them? Okay. All right. So we are, we started last Thursday with a virtual public meeting. We'll have in-person meetings starting tonight and tomorrow and the next night, and then a few more. We got 7 in total, and then another virtual one to wrap it up. Before we start talking about that, as is our habit, we've been trying to make sure counselors are aware of any written comment that's come in between meetings. And you'll see posted online is a quick summary of written comment. And in fact, I'll just show it because it's pretty brief. And you can click through these written comments to, like, some of them are letters that are longer. Oops, hang on a second. I almost left the meeting. This is the link online if you just click through your agenda. There's a letter from the Vermont Interfaith Power and Light Board, which for those of you who are not aware, it is not power and light as in terms of electricity distribution. But there's a letter and you can click through and you'll see, and it has some specific thoughts for you all about specific ideas on climate action that range from transportation to about how the portfolio standard works for renewable energy. So there's a range of comments on this, and I'll let you all read that to yourself, and encourage you to act with speed. There's also a letter from an organization called Local Motion in Burlington, and this letter encourages you to really think about instruments that reduce vehicle miles traveled as a way of reducing emissions, and investing in transit and other transportation options. So there's that letter, and it references work that had gone on in Colorado. And then there's a number of short comments here, just two. This one is encouraging operational efficiencies over necessarily equipment. And this one is talking about electricity supply and concerns about what happens if Vermont faces reduced electricity supply, and how it not resort to fossil fuel generation in those situations. So that's what's come in. Quick questions, anything about that? I encourage, it's all on the website, encourage folks to look at that. Okay. So that was that. And Sophie is typically, Sophie, I just jumped right in here because I wasn't sure if you're here. It looks like you may be here. Sophie's setting up the, getting ready for our in-person meeting tonight. Sophie, is there anything else you'd like to say about comments that have come in that I didn't do in my summary?
No, you did a great job. Thank you, David.
Awesome. Okay. All right. So then the next thing is to talk about the meetings tonight. And I think Carrick did a nice segue, nice little prompt there, which is for those of you who listened in and participated in last Thursday's conversation, let's just hear some feedback about that. Like, how was that? How was it to listen in? How was the session? I'd be curious. I know some of you were there. I'll stop talking for a little bit. If folks just want to weigh in, what were your reactions to listening in and participating in last week's session? Thoughts? Jared?
Thanks, David. Yeah, I'll just offer that I really appreciated hearing from so many different voices and in so many different ways. I thought that the electronic polls worked really seamlessly, and that we were able to kind of see in real time both specific comments from a lot of people and then also themes get aggregated through the use of technology, looking for keywords and key themes. So I appreciated that. I also appreciated the balance of kind of having full session, kind of context sharing and seeing the live results of those survey questions, but then also having breakout sessions where there were smaller groups and there could be more kind of personal conversation and hearing directly from folks. So I thought it achieved a good balance and it was a good mix and it was really valuable. It'll be interesting to see how much of that I recognize that there's challenges to replicating some of the tools that were used for the virtual meeting in person, but I'm sure we'll get things out of the in-person meetings that we couldn't get out of the virtual meetings. So I think altogether it will be very valuable. So kudos to the folks who organized it and to everybody who showed up and shared their thoughts and perspective.
Thanks, Jared. Appreciate that. For those who weren't there, there's about 111 people on the line. I think some of that's us. So roughly about 100 folks, I think, showed up. Carrick, were you there?
113 people total. Well, because I was surprised, honestly. I mean, there were some usual suspects, counting myself as one of those, but there were a lot of civilians, I would say, that how I describe it. I think it was one, I will say it's an impossible task. I mean, having stepped away and then coming in and you kind of look at it like anew, I mean, that's a lot of stuff to throw at people. That is I mean, it's kind of freaking dense and there's some, I mean, that's tough. So I credit the crew for doing it. I would say it was a pretty diverse set of viewpoints. I mean, in terms of what was articulated, I think, David, I didn't see all the, I was watching on my iPad, so I couldn't see all the, so I couldn't see all the back and forth, but I think you said about 4 or 5 times, essentially play nice with each other, people. So
we had one challenge in the chat. Yes.
Okay. I actually thought that the breakout session might have been the most useful. I agree with Jared. I like some of the kind of I remember one in particular. Here's the 4 quadrants of what people are really seem to be centering on. I don't know how the algorithm actually, groups, but trusting the thing, that was pretty interesting. And then it was kind of there was a little bit of a, I guess that person was a neighbor. Anyway, so there's a neighbor who got into trees and everything blew up on trees there for a bit, which fine. But all in all, for a first effort, I thought Jane and you, and I thought Liz Amler did a great job in our breakout session, kind of making sure everyone was heard. I didn't feel as like that's for the public to speak, so I didn't say anything. But it was good. So overall, I would thought it was a pretty useful session. I just wish I wish there was a way to make stuff that gets dense so quickly less so. I don't know. I don't have any great insight or anything really helpful. I'll just say I know it's tough.
Thanks, Carrick.
You're
I
welcome.
appreciate all that reflection. I would welcome counselors if you were there, if you have some thoughts about, I think in addition to what you're saying, Carrick, which is always try to provide as clear, I won't necessarily the word simple, but as clear a storyline and message as possible. Avoid the dense and jargon. Are there other things that people would say, like as we go into this week of meetings, in-person meetings, that might be a learning from last Thursday? How was it to be a counselor there? Like, how was it to be sort of witnessing all this?
How candid shall I be, David? How candid
Well,
shall I
you're
be?
being recorded in a public meeting,
Oh,
so
that's okay. Well,
I would say as candid as you want that recording to be.
and these kinds of things, quite honestly, what I'm looking for really is who got their people out. Like who excited, hey, make sure you show up or do that. And so when I use the term civilians, I mean it. To me, it seemed like, I mean, there was a segment of people that I saw, I could kind of feel which one. And hey, fair enough, right? Democracy is a participatory sport. Great. But there were people there that, at least to me, seemed genuinely concerned, interested in the issue. And it was a wide range of viewpoints that people who were genuinely interested, there of their own volition, in my opinion, so you take it for what it's worth. But that was pretty meaningful to me. Overall, I guess it was like, it's like watching an experiment unfold, right? Because there's so much stuff. We think this is the best way to elicit the most constructive feedback. and how is that working? So I guess it's sort of it's a microcosm of whomever has put us in this grand global simulation we're supposed to be in now, how they're watching. That's what I would say.
Thanks, Carrick.
You're welcome.
That image. Other counselors, other reactions, particularly if you were listening on last Thursday? Chris?
This is a question, not I wasn't able to make it. I was getting ready for a medical thing, but I guess I have a question. I mean, one of the things I would love to tease out of this, I don't know that these are necessarily geared to do that, but on the adaptation and resilience side of things, are we getting feedback, or could we get feedback? Did we get feedback on do people want to adapt to the challenges in front of us? And can we get feedback on how they want to adapt, how they want to invest in that? Or just kind of, are we okay with the status quo? Was there any input on that by chance?
I'm thinking off the top of my head, Chris, it's a good question. I mean, for folks who weren't there, the way we were structuring the conversation, after doing some introductory things about sort of how Vermont and how participants were experiencing climate action, and then what's been happening on climate action the last 4 years, and then we got into the draft priority actions. And the questions we asked on the draft priority actions were really, what feels motivating, right, and compelling for Vermont? Like, what are you excited about when you look at these actions? That was question number one. And question number two is, what's the most urgent feedback you have for the council, right? And so when you think about the kinds of answers we got from that, there's a number of things that people shouted out. They felt like, wow, this is really important. And included in that were things that, I don't know, Chris, if you would call it adaptation. I have to go back and really think about it. But for the folks who were there, you got a sense that like there's urgency, things need to happen. This is important for Vermont, right? That was the kind of, from most people there. I'd welcome other counselors who are listening in if you have a different impression.
Well, how nuanced? I mean, absolutely that. But I would say, you tell me, but I would say there is also an element of just being well, one was stated plainly a few times that came up, stop basically telling us what to do. I love this state, but I'm trying to afford living here. The real concerns just about the net cumulative impact of the things we're talking about. And that was I think it was less often stated, but absolutely present.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Okay. I have a few more things to say about this week, but before I do that, I'll take Annette, if you want to chime in with your comment. Now's a great time to do that.
Thank you. So I'm very happy to have heard what you had to say first. I took screenshots of the participants when there were 107 people in the room. And I looked them all up because I was very curious who was there. And I rearranged them in order. So the numbers 93 through 107 were from the Office of Climate, the Climate Council, and subcommittee members. So that was 14 people. I lumped a bunch of people into what I call the usual suspects, including me. That was about 22 people. I found 11 people who had common names or names that I just maybe thought were made up, but I couldn't figure out who they were. 11 names who I looked up, but I'm not sure if they're the right people. So that left about 45 people who I identified as sort of the average Vermonters that we want to hear from. I was the only one from Rutland County. I think there was one person from Addison County, to Carrick's point of who turned their people out. The NVDA, I think, did a good job turning people out. There were quite a few people from the Danville and Northeast Kingdom region, more than I expected. Interfaith Power and Light had quite a few. I put them in the usual suspects. Some of the environmental groups, I put them in the usual suspects. Vermont Law School. There were a surprising number of people in the health field, nurses, and there were educators. There were some energy data people, farmers, not a lot. So that's sort of my demographic review of it. In terms of the statewide geographic dispersion, there were a few from Windham County, a few from Windsor County, a bit more from Bennington County, and as I said, more than I expected from the Northeast Kingdom, but a lot from Chittenden County. In terms of the program itself, I will note that I think it started at 5:30 and ended at 7. As I recall, our breakout session and discussion didn't happen until about 6:28. So that meant that nearly an hour went by before anybody talked. Kashka was the facilitator. Jared was in the room. There were 15 of us in the room. Backing up first, I thought that the initial questions and that the surveys were good, and it was fun to see the results. But back to the room, it was. I sent a note to Jane after it was over. It was really bizarre, because people, the first person who wanted to speak said, "I have to leave at 6:30." And he raised his hand, and Kashka said, "Well, put your comments in the chat." And she kept telling people to put your comments in the chat. And so a couple of times I intervened because people had their hands up, and I said, "Could we hear from people?" So this was not done in a way that maybe it was in other breakout sessions, but in the one I was in, I kept having to say, "Could we hear from Mary? Could we hear from Linda? Could we hear from people?" Because we were just, Kashka, we had 3 minutes left. She said, "Put your comments in the chat." It's the strangest breakout session I've ever been in. I thought we were there to hear each other, and I really want to hear from people. On Chris's question of what were people interested in, that sort of gets to, I think, what needs to be done if to be of value to the counselors who are trying to finish a plan, and these flashcards that you have. The way that the questions were posed kind of gets you generic answers. The first two responses that were in the chat specifically pointed to a numbered flashcard. And I was one of those. I was trying to sort of set an example, but somebody else did it too. But then after that, it just sort of degenerated into whatever anybody's issue was. And so I wonder how useful that session is to you all in terms of getting you specific comments on the priorities that you are actually seeking recommendations on. And so if I can offer you one bit of constructive advice for how to make sure that you get more out of these sessions. Yes, it's a lot. People were given time to read the flashcards. I had the benefit that I had seen them a couple times before. But if you can get people to focus their comments on specific recommendations, that would, I think, be more useful to you than for people to just say, yes, we need to reduce emissions. I mean, it's just, I really felt like it was kind of a waste of time the way it was run. And maybe you get something useful out of it, but I think it could be, especially the in-person meetings, can be made much, much more effective in getting those discussions going and pointedly focusing them on the flashcards. So there's my input for you.
Thanks, and I appreciate that input. And I hear loud and clear the importance of keeping folks anchored to the content coming out of the council, which are these priority draft actions. I appreciate that input. And I will note as well that in terms of the geographic distribution in the registration form, when you signed up for the meeting, we asked for location, so we should have that, and we could do a little report on that. So maybe a little map or something that shows
Yeah, I
that.
figured you would have those demographics from the sign up, but
Yeah.
I I looked up who people were, and I don't know what you can do more, but the council doesn't have any members from Rutland or Addison County or Bennington County. We're getting left out over here in the Mohican land area. So anything you can do, it is a different demographic from other parts of Vermont. It's different in terms of our mountains. We have the Taconics instead of the Green Mountains. We have a lot of differences that are important to capture.
Thanks, Annette. Jared?
Thanks, David, and thanks, Nat. I just wanted to note a point of information as somebody who was also in that breakout group, because I understood what Kashka was asking for differently, which was because people had to leave, wanting to make sure that their comment wasn't lost, so asking it to be written down so that it could be captured as part of the write-up. So totally agree that we want to hear from people in the breakout sessions. But what I heard from Kashka, I appreciated, which is if folks were going to leave, that it was valuable to have the feedback that they wanted to provide in writing so that it could be captured and incorporated into the overall write-up for the full council and combined with the feedback from the other public engagement sessions. So just wanted to offer that.
Thanks, Jared. Appreciate it. All right, folks. I think we're winding up here, and I guess I'll just encourage everyone to come out to as many of these sessions as possible over the next 2 weeks, or it's actually 3 weeks by the time I will sit and listen and be part of it. And one of the things I just wanted to mention before we break up today is sometimes it's really hard to listen. And also, if folks are asking questions of you, like, why is this? What is going on? How do you provide that historical context, which I think is a valuable thing for you to provide in a meeting like this, while not getting sucked into some debate around things? And so I didn't see that happen Thursday night. I'll just say in person, there may be more of a dynamic of how do you as counselors show up, be good listeners, provide context and information where it's appropriate, and not get sucked into like extensive back and forth, right? Because that could be less productive for everybody else. I'm just curious, for those of you who've been around the block a couple of times and doing these public meetings, if you have any advice for your fellow counselors on how to show up effectively in these kinds of meetings. I know some of you have done a lot of these. I know, Kelly, you've been a lot, and others have been a lot. I'm curious, like, do you have any words of wisdom before we get off the line here today? Kelly?
I think showing your active listening, I think, is something that people appreciate. So looking at the person who's talking, reactions like nodding and things like that, that can go a long way to people feeling heard when there's not a lot of opportunity to say, I hear what you said, and like paraphrase it back to them. Like, they teach you in some of these active listening coaching sessions. But I do think when that is an option, just to, say thank you and then making sure that there's some understanding of how these are going to be taken and considered and all of that after the session. But yeah, I think that like being engaged and leaning forward and really listening and opening your ears, I think people see that and can tell. And it's a lot easier to tell that in person than on a Zoom meeting.
Yeah, thanks, Kelly. And I'm glad you brought up the active listening sort of mantras, right? How you demonstrate that you're actually listening to somebody. Julie?
I think the other piece is to resist the need to respond to every comment, to let people know, as Kelly said, that you've heard them, but without directly engaging. I think we can use up a lot of the very short time we have available to hear from the public trying to respond to individual concerns. And so need to kind of adopt a posture of acknowledging the concern, but not trying to use the modest amount of available time to respond to each and every individual inquiry, even if they feel like they're directed at you as a counselor.
Thanks, Secretary Moore. Yeah. All right. Anything else? Any words of wisdom before we head out and do all these? And Chris Campany, I'm looking at your comment in the chat, and we actually are having a little exercise. It's kind of during the mill around time. It's not part of the formal time of the meeting, but we're encouraging everyone to do it, where there's going to be a table set out, and on that table will be set up this sort of area in 4 quadrants, representing the sort of 4 big buckets of the priority actions. And you'll be given like 10 chips, like poker type chips, and to say, how would you prioritize funding in these different areas? And everyone will just pile in their chips where how we want to do it. And so it's one way of getting at what you're saying, Chris, which is sort of, there's a lot of competing priorities. Where would you put the most funding if you had some say in that? So it's just it's a little exercise to prompt that question. Okay. Thanks, everyone. I think that's all. Sophie, if you're there and you want to add something, please do. If there's anything else I've been forgetting here.
Thanks. I just really appreciate what Kelly and Secretary Moore added, and I hope this time with the public will be valuable for you all.
Yeah. Yeah. And for anyone who hasn't seen the website, it's updated with all of this. Let me show you real quick on my screen. Actually, I can show you how to get there on your own, if you want. There's a couple pathways in, but the one I know best is under the Get Involved tab, Learn and Act, and Climate Action Plan Update. And here we've got a website that's really in a landing place for people to learn more about what's about to happen. It has all of the meetings here and how to register for those meetings. It has the priority draft actions that Liz Miller was looking for earlier. They're right here. And so this is updated, has a nice little flyer here and all that good stuff, right? And this is also where you can see all the submitted comments as well. And you can submit a written comment this way as well. Okay, so this is all online. Please spread it around your own networks. There's a lot of effort going in to raise awareness about these events. Please use your own networks to raise awareness as well.
Yeah, send it to my sister. See if she goes.
Exactly. That's exactly the right thing to do.
We agree on like 30% stuff, so we'll see what she says.
That's fun. Yeah, we could all send it to like 3 family members or friends, go a long ways. Great. Okay, folks. Why don't we end a little early? Thanks, everyone. We'll see you out there. Hope to see several of you in some evening events this week.
Thank you.
All right. Take care, everybody.